They never saw Daniel Mercer as a threat, and that was the first mistake they made. Because when people think power only looks like tailored suits and sharp voices in glass offices, they forget that sometimes power sits quietly at a kitchen table with calloused hands and eyes that have seen loss, but not defeat. And Daniel Mercer had lost a lot before the story even began. Lost his wife to a sudden illness. Lost his job when the factory shut down without warning. Lost his savings one hospital bill at a time. And then, finally, he was about to lose the house. The small, weathered home his father built with borrowed tools and stubborn hope. The house where laughter once lived and grief now echoed. The house whose peeling paint and sagging porch told the world that whoever lived inside was struggling. And that was exactly why Victor Hale noticed it. Victor Hale, a man whose name carried weight in real estate circles, a man whose smile never reached his eyes, a man who called himself a distressed property investor, but operated more like a hunter who had learned to dress like a savior. He spoke softly, respectfully, as if he were doing Daniel a favor simply by standing there. And he said all the right words about understanding hard times, about wanting to help families avoid foreclosure, about solutions that banks didn't offer. And Daniel, tired and desperate and still wearing his grief like a second skin, listened. Because when you're drowning, you don't question the hand that reaches toward you, even if you can't see what's hidden behind the wrist. And Victor saw that immediately, saw the way Daniel nodded instead of interrupting, the way he apologized for the clutter in his home, the way he kept saying he just needed a little more time. And Victor smiled. Because time was exactly what he was there to steal, not from Daniel, but from the law, from scrutiny, from consequences. And he explained the deal as if it were simple, almost generous. Sign the papers. Let Victor's company take over. No foreclosure, no ruined credit. A clean slate. And Daniel hesitated, asked if he should talk to a lawyer. And Victor laughed lightly, the kind of laugh that makes you feel foolish for asking, the kind that says trust me without saying it. And he replied that lawyers only complicate things, that time was short, that the bank was already moving, and that if Daniel didn't act now, everything would be lost. And so Daniel signed, his name shaky but hopeful, believing that one signature could save his home, not knowing that one signature would become the lie that unraveled everything. Because weeks passed, then months, and the payments Victor promised to make quietly stopped. And the letters started arriving again, thicker this time, colder. And when Daniel tried calling, the number went unanswered. When he drove to the office address listed on the contract, it was empty, a rented space long abandoned. And panic settled into his bones as the realization hit him slowly and painfully, like a bruise that spreads after the impact, that the house was no longer his, that the mortgage was still in his name, that foreclosure was coming anyway, and that Victor Hale had already refinanced the property, pulled out the equity, and moved on to the next family. And in that moment, Daniel understood something that burned hotter than anger, hotter even than fear. He understood that he had been underestimated, not because he was weak, but because Victor believed broken people stayed broken, and that assumption would become Victor's undoing. Because Daniel did not collapse, he did not scream or beg or disappear. Instead, he started paying attention. He started reading every letter, every clause, every public record he could access. He started visiting the courthouse, sitting quietly in the back, listening to names that sounded familiar, addresses that mirrored his own situation, and slowly, like pieces of a shattered mirror, the pattern revealed itself. Victor Hale's name connected to shell companies connected to foreclosures connected to families who thought they had been saved. And Daniel realized this wasn't just about him. This was a machine, and machines leave trails. And while Victor continued hosting seminars in hotel ballrooms, boasting about his success, mocking homeowners who didn't understand business, Daniel was gathering something far more dangerous than money or influence. He was gathering truth. And truth has a way of becoming heavy when enough people carry it together. Alone for long, he found Maria, a single mother who lost her home while still paying rent to the man who owned it. He found Thomas, a retired veteran who signed away his deed thinking he was avoiding foreclosure. He found families who blamed themselves, who felt ashamed, who thought they were stupid. And Daniel did something Victor never expected. He listened to them. He reminded them they weren't weak. They were targeted, and one by one, they agreed to speak, to document, to testify, and Victor, drunk on his own sense of invincibility, never saw it coming. Never noticed the quiet man in the back of the courtroom. Never recognized the name Daniel Mercer when it appeared on a civil filing. Because people like Victor don't look down. They assume anyone beneath them stays there. Until the day the power shifts without warning. And it happened in a way no one anticipated. Not with a dramatic arrest or a public scandal at first, but with silence, with investors pulling out, with banks freezing transactions, with questions Victor couldn't laugh away. And when the case finally surfaced, it wasn't framed as a single fraud. It was framed as a system, a calculated exploitation of desperation. And Daniel sat in the witness chair, calm, composed, no longer asking for mercy, only telling the truth. And the irony was sharp enough to draw blood. Because the same documents Victor once waved dismissively now worked against him. The same signatures he relied on became evidence of intent. And as the judge listened, as the courtroom filled with people Victor once ignored, something rare happened. The powerful figure was forced to listen to those he dismissed, forced to hear how his business model destroyed lives. And when the ruling came down, it didn't just penalize Victor financially, it dismantled his operations, froze his assets, and opened the door for restitution. And, in that moment, justice felt real, not loud or vengeful, but firm, measured, and overdue. And Daniel didn't smile, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration, about balance, about proving that dignity survives even when everything else is taken. And as families reclaimed what they could, as Victor was led away, stripped of the authority he once wielded so casually, Daniel stood outside the courthouse, the same man who once signed away his home believing a lie, now holding something far more valuable than property, the knowledge that being underestimated is not a curse, it's camouflage. And just when it seemed like the story had reached its end, just when justice appeared complete, Daniel received a file in the mail, anonymous, unmarked, containing names, companies, and deals that went far beyond Victor Hale, revealing a network larger, deeper, and far more dangerous than one man. And as Daniel opened the folder, understanding that the truth he uncovered was only the beginning, the question lingered in the air like a held breath. If one signature could destroy a family overnight, how many signatures were still waiting to be exposed? The folder sat on Daniel Mercer's kitchen table like a quiet threat, thick, heavy, impossible to ignore. And as he stared at it, he felt the same tightening in his chest he had felt the day Victor Hale knocked on his door. Because some instincts never fade, they only sharpen. And this instinct told him that what lay inside those pages was not closure, but escalation. Not an ending, but an invitation into something larger and far more dangerous. And when Daniel finally opened the folder, slowly, deliberately, as if speed itself could be used against him, he understood immediately why it had arrived anonymously. Because the names inside were not small, not careless, not reckless like Victor. They were polished, protected, layered behind corporate veils and legal firewalls. Men and women who did not knock on doors themselves, who did not sit at kitchen tables or smile kindly at desperate families, but who funded the machine that made Victor possible, who trained him, insured him, insulated him, and used people like him as disposable fronts. And suddenly the story changed shape, because this was no longer about one predator exploiting vulnerability. This was about a system designed to harvest it. And Daniel felt the weight of responsibility settle onto him, heavy and unwelcome, because he understood something most people never want to understand, that once you see how deep the rot goes, you don't get to look away anymore. And the irony was cruel, because Daniel had never wanted to be a symbol or a voice or a leader. He had only wanted to save his home. And now here he was, holding evidence that could expose a network operating quietly across cities, across states, across communities that trusted too easily. And as the days passed, Daniel noticed the shift in the air around him, the subtle changes that only someone who has lost everything learns to recognize. The unfamiliar car parked too long down the street, the phone calls that ended when he answered, the sudden silence from people who had once returned messages quickly, and fear crept in, not loud or dramatic, but slow and calculating, the kind that asks questions in the dark. Questions like how far these people were willing to go, and whether justice truly protected those who pursued it. And the temptation to walk away whispered to him constantly, to take the small victory they had earned, to rebuild quietly, to let the rest burn on its own. And for a moment, just a moment, Daniel almost listened, because courage is not the absence of fear, it is the decision to move forward while fear lists all the reasons you shouldn't. And what stopped him was not anger, not pride, not even revenge, but memory. The memory of Maria crying in her car after losing her home. The memory of Thomas staring at the floor as if eye contact itself might condemn him. The memory of his own signature, shaking as he signed away something he believed defined his worth. And Daniel realized that silence was the currency the system depended on. Shame was the lock, and fear was the guard. And the moment someone refused to carry those alone, the structure weakened. So Daniel made a decision that night that would change everything again. He contacted the journalist who had first helped expose Victor, not with a plea, with a demand, but with evidence, undeniable, meticulously organized. And when the journalist saw the names, the shell companies, the identical contract language, repeated across dozens of cases, the room went quiet, because journalists know when a story becomes history. And this was one of those moments. And from there, the momentum built faster than Daniel expected. Because truth, once released, does not travel alone, it attracts others who have been waiting to speak. Former employees, junior partners, legal clerks who had noticed irregularities but were told not to ask questions. And slowly, painfully, the image came into focus. A national operation that specialized in legal gray zones, that exploited outdated regulations, that thrived in the gap between what was legal and what was just. And as the story broke, the response from the powerful was exactly what Daniel had feared. Denial first, then dismissal, then character attacks. Because when systems are threatened, they do not defend themselves with honesty. They defend themselves with intimidation. And Daniel became a target, not because he was wrong, but because he was right. Because his credibility had already been proven in court. Because he was not loud or reckless or arrogant, but calm and consistent. And that terrified them. Because calm truth is harder to discredit than rage. And suddenly, Daniel's past was scrutinized publicly, his finances, his employment history, his grief, as if suffering disqualified someone from speaking about injustice. And watching this unfold was its own kind of cruelty. Because the same people who had ignored him when he was desperate now spoke his name with contempt, calling him unstable, calling him bitter, calling him opportunistic. And the dramatic irony cut deep, because the very vulnerability that made him a victim was now being used to try to silence him. But something unexpected happened next. Something Victor Hale had never experienced and never planned for. The public listened, because they recognized the story, because too many people had felt the same pressure, signed similar papers, trusted similar smiles, and the outrage spread quietly at first. Then all at once, like a dam cracking under accumulated weight, and regulators began asking questions they could no longer avoid. Banks paused transactions, lawmakers demanded hearings, and behind closed doors, panic replaced confidence. Because these investors had always believed themselves untouchable, protected by complexity, shielded by distance. And now a man they once considered invisible had dragged them into the light. And Daniel felt the cost of that every day. The exhaustion, the anxiety, the isolation. Because justice is not glamorous when you are living inside it. It is draining, it is lonely, it asks for more than it gives. And there were nights Daniel sat alone, wondering if it was worth it. if the damage had already been done, if any ruling could truly restore what had been lost. And then the hearings began, not the kind that deliver immediate satisfaction, but the slow, methodical kind where power is questioned line by line. And Daniel testified again, this time not as a victim, but as a witness to a system. And as executives squirmed under oath, as contradictions surfaced, as carefully rehearsed narratives collapsed under documentation, something rare occurred. Accountability moved upward, and the people, who once believed they operated above consequence, were forced to explain themselves to those they never thought they owed answers to. And the turning point came quietly, without headlines at first, when a senior partner broke ranks, offered cooperation in exchange for leniency, and confirmed what Daniel's folder had suggested all along, that Victor Hale was never the architect, only a tool. And with that confirmation, indictments followed, settlements were negotiated, policies were rewritten, and while the system did not collapse entirely, it fractured enough to let light in, enough to force reform. And on the day the final ruling was announced, Daniel stood again outside the courthouse, not alone this time, but surrounded by people who had once felt invisible. And as reporters asked him how it felt to take down such a powerful network, Daniel answered honestly, that power did not disappear, it shifted, and that the real victory was not punishment, but awareness, because exploitation thrives in silence. And the moment people learn to read what they sign, to ask for time, to seek counsel, the machine loses fuel. And as the crowd dispersed, as cameras turned away, Daniel felt something he had not felt in years. Peace, not because everything was fixed, but because he had reclaimed his agency. And yet, even as that peace settled, the dramatic irony remained, because justice is never final. And as Daniel returned home that evening, a message waited on his phone, brief, anonymous, and unsettling. 3 words that reopened the story just as it seemed complete. 3 words that promised the fight was far from over. 3 words that whispered instead of shouted, reminding him that systems adapt, predators evolve, and truth must be defended again and again. The message read simply, you missed one.